Welcome back to Horror Galaxy. Tonight, I have 6 untold disturbing Orgeon small-town horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the Horror Galaxy, you don't walk alone. I was halfway through filing the attendance cards when I realized the stack felt wrong in my hands. Too thick for one grade, too heavy for a Tuesday morning, and my stomach tightened before I understood why. I flipped the cards back to the start, smoothing the corners like I always did, and there it was again, neat blue ink, perfect cursive, the same name written on the same line, for every single day, Daniel Mercer present. I stared at it longer than I should have. We didn't have a Daniel Mercer. I'd been the elementary school secretary in CO long enough to know every child by name, by handwriting, by the way their parents sounded on the phone. I knew who forgot lunch money and who cried on the first day every year. Daniel Mercer meant nothing to me, and that alone was unsettling. I told myself it was a filing error. That happened. Cards got misfiled, names carried over, human mistakes. I pulled Daniel's card free and checked the top. Year after year, stamped and restamped, going back 6 full school years. Same teacher initials, same clean attendance line. No absences, no tardies. Just present, 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 every day without exception. I opened the enrollment ledger, flipping pages faster now. No Daniel Mercer. I checked withdrawals, transfers, special education records, emergency contacts. Nothing. No parents. No address. No birth certificate copy. It was as if the child existed only in ink. I remember laughing quietly to myself then, the kind of laugh you use to keep panic from leaking out. I told myself someone must have used the wrong card as a placeholder. I slid it back into the stack and tried to continue working, but my eyes kept drifting to that name like it was pulling them. At lunch, I mentioned it to Carol, one of the second grade teachers. I said the name casually, like it meant nothing. She paused with her sandwich halfway to her mouth and frowned. "Daniel who?" she asked. "Mercer," I said. "Did you ever have a student by that name?" She shook her head slowly. "No. You sure he wasn't before my time?" "He's marked present in your class," I said, tapping the card. She took it from me, squinted, and then handed it back too quickly. "That's strange," she said, and changed the subject. I noticed her hands were shaking. That afternoon, I checked the class photos stored in the supply room. Year by year, smiling children in neat rows. I counted heads, comparing them to enrollment numbers. In the photo from 6 years ago, I found him. A boy standing at the end of the second row, dark hair neatly combed, hands folded like he'd practiced. He wasn't smiling. He was looking straight at the camera, at me, like he knew I would eventually be holding that photo. In the next year's photo, he was there again, and the next. Always the same age, always the same face. I felt cold then, deep in my chest. I checked the most recent photo. There he was, still 8 years old, still standing at the edge, still not smiling. I brought the photos to the principal, Mr. Harris. I told him what I'd found, watching his face carefully as he looked. He went quiet, then closed the office door. "We're not going to talk about this," he said. Not calmly, sharply. "There's a child on our records who doesn't exist," I said. "That's not something we can ignore." He leaned forward. "You are going to remove that card." You are going to stop looking into this. And you are not going to mention it again. I asked him why, and he didn't answer. He just looked tired, older than he had that morning. That night, I dreamed of rows of empty desks, attendance cards flipping themselves, one by one, until only Daniel's remained. The next morning, I found a note on my desk in handwriting I recognized as my own. It said, "He doesn't like being erased." My mouth went dry. I checked the attendance stack. Daniel's card was gone. Relief washed over me so fast it made my knees weak. I told myself it was over. That reason had returned. Then the phone rang. A woman's voice, soft and careful, asked if Daniel had been marked present yet. I asked her who she was. She said she was his mother. I asked her where he lived. She hesitated, then said, "In the school." I hung up shaking. I searched the building that evening, staying late until the halls emptied. In a storage closet near the oldest wing, behind stacked chairs, I found a small desk bolted to the floor. Inside it was a single notebook, filled with careful handwriting. Daniel's handwriting. Every page listed dates, followed by the word present. On the last page, today's date was written. The word was unfinished. I understood then. The card wasn't tracking him. It was keeping him here. He was being counted into existence. The next morning, I filled out the attendance sheet myself. I wrote Daniel Mercer absent. My hand trembled, but I finished the line. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the building, a child screamed. I stayed seated, breathing through it, forcing myself not to change the mark. By the end of the day, the desk in the closet was gone. The photos showed one less child. The attendance card stack felt right again. I quit at the end of the year. I never told anyone the full story. Sometimes, when I drive past the school, I swear I see a boy standing by the fence, watching me leave. I keep driving. I don't look back. I was tightening the laces on my boots when the radio crackled, and someone said they'd found something downriver. I remember feeling relieved before I knew what it was, because after 3 days of searching for Ethan Miller, any find felt like progress. I told the others to hold position and followed the voice along the bank, my clipboard tucked under my arm, my head already rehearsing how I'd explain another dead end to his parents. The shoes were set just above the waterline, toes pointed toward the trees, heels nearly touching, a clean pair of black sneakers, laces tied in neat bows. Not scuffed, not muddy, not waterlogged. They looked like they'd been placed there for a photograph. I knew immediately they weren't Ethan's. I knew because I'd helped his mother identify his boots on the first day, and because these were too small. Maybe he took them off. Someone said behind me. "No," I said without turning. He wouldn't have tied them like that. We logged the find, bagged the shoes, and moved on. I told myself it was just debris carried by the current, something dropped upstream. Rivers do strange things. That was what I told the sheriff later that evening, and what I told myself again when I couldn't sleep. The next morning, another pair turned up, different style, different size, same arrangement, clean, tied, facing inland. By the 4th day, we had 6 pairs. I started bringing old, missing persons files from the county office, spreading them across the folding table in the fire hall. I wasn't supposed to do that, but I needed to see if my gut feeling had any shape to it. It did. Every pair matched someone who'd gone missing near water in the last 20 years. A fisherman, a hiker, a kid who fell in while swimming. All unsolved, all presumed drowned. None of their bodies had ever been found. I didn't tell anyone what I was seeing. I kept coordinating searches, assigning grid areas, speaking calmly to families. At night, I drove back to the river alone and stood where the shoes had been found, trying to understand the angle of the current, the way the bank curved. The shoes never faced the water. That was what bothered me most. It was like whoever put them there wanted to be seen coming home. On the 7th day, Ethan's shoes appeared. They were set a little higher than the others, like they were being kept dry. I dropped to my knees without realizing it, my chest tightening so hard I thought I might pass out. I untied one lace, just to prove to myself they were real. My hands shook the whole time. That afternoon, I drove to Ethan's parents' house with the shoes on the passenger seat. His mother didn't scream when she saw them. She just nodded, like something had finally clicked into place. His father asked where the rest of him was. I didn't have an answer. That night, I went back to the river and didn't bring a flashlight. I stood in the dark, listening to the water, feeling stupid and desperate. I told myself I was just exhausted, that stress was making patterns where none existed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. A man stepped into the faint light from the road. He was older than me, his face lined and familiar in a way I couldn't place. He asked if I was the one putting the shoes out. I asked him what he meant. "They come back," he said, "if you give them away." He told me he'd lost his sister in the river when he was a boy, that he'd waited for her. That one morning, her shoes had been there, just like that. He'd put them back in the water, thinking it was the right thing. The next night, they returned, along with another pair. He stopped putting them back after that. "They're markers," he said. "They mean someone's ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. "To come home," he said, "or to be counted." The word hit me harder than it should have. The next day, I made a decision I can barely admit to now. I told the team we were scaling back the search. I told Ethan's parents there was nothing more we could do. Then I went back to the river with the shoes we'd collected and set them in a line along the bank, all facing the trees. I don't know how long I stood there after. I remember the ground vibrating, like something large was moving beneath it. I remember the sound of water changing, becoming quieter, like it was being swallowed. One by one, they came out. Not whole, not right, but recognizable. Ethan was last. He looked like he'd been underwater for minutes, not days. He opened his eyes and looked at me like he knew me. "I'm done," he said. The river was still after that. No more shoes appeared. The cases were closed, bodies returned, funerals held. I moved away from Powers not long after. People still thank me when I visit, still call me a hero. I let them. I don't go near rivers anymore. I don't coordinate searches. And I don't untie my shoes unless I absolutely have to. I was halfway past the gravel turnout when I noticed the sign again. The rusted yellow square bolted to a bent metal pole. The word "Stope" barely visible under years of scratches. I slowed without meaning to, my backpack sliding on my shoulders, my shoes crunching louder than usual. No buses had ever stopped there. Everyone knew that. The school bus dropped us closer to town, and this stretch of road was just something you walked past on the way home. Someone was standing there. He was an older man, maybe my dad's age, wearing a jacket that looked too thin. He wasn't looking at the road. He was facing the trees, standing close to the pole like he was waiting for it to speak. I watched him as I passed, my heart beating faster, because adults didn't stand there. They never had before. "Are you waiting for the bus?" I asked, because that was the kind of thing adults asked kids, and it felt safer to flip it. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes were tired, not angry, not sad, just worn down. "It's late," he said, and then looked back toward the trees. I walked home faster after that, glancing over my shoulder until the road curved away and I couldn't see the sign anymore. That night, I told my mom someone weird was hanging around by the old stop. She said it was probably a lost traveler and told me to take the longer way home if it bothered me. The next afternoon, there were two people, a woman and a man, standing a few feet apart, both facing away from the road. They didn't talk. They didn't look at me when I passed. I remember the woman's shoes, how clean they were, like she hadn't walked there. I felt a strange pull in my chest, like when you miss a step on the stairs and your body panics before your mind does. I started crossing the road to avoid them, but even from farther away I could feel them there, waiting. For what, I didn't know. Each day there were more, never the same people. Always adults, always silent, always facing inland, toward the fields and trees, not the road. I tried to count them once, but my hands started shaking and I lost track. On Friday, I noticed the scratches. They were low on the pole, fresh and pale against the rust, like someone had carved into it recently. Letters. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, my skin buzzing. It took a second for my brain to put them together. My name, not carved neatly, scratched over and over, like whoever did it wasn't sure how to spell it at first, or was afraid of being seen. I felt dizzy. I looked around, but the people at the stop hadn't moved. None of them were watching me. I ran home crying, my backpack bouncing painfully against my back. My mom knelt in front of me, worried, asking what happened, and I tried to explain through sobs that my name was on the bus stop. She said someone was playing a prank. She said kids did that. She didn't go look. The next Monday, the people were closer together, standing shoulder to shoulder. I recognized one of them. It took me a moment to place him, because my memory resisted it, but then it clicked. Mr. Keller. He'd lived 2 houses down and moved away the year before. I remembered because his dog had followed me home once. He didn't look older. He looked exactly the same. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. None of them did. I noticed then that they weren't breathing. Not that I could see. I stopped walking home that way after that. I begged my mom to let me get picked up or to walk with friends. But schedules changed, and sometimes I had no choice. Each time I passed the sign, my name was scratched deeper, clearer. One afternoon, the sign was gone. The pole remained bent and bare, the ground around it scuffed like it had been crowded. No people stood there. I felt relief so strong it made me lightheaded. I walked home slowly, letting myself believe it was over. That night, I dreamed I was standing by the pole, older, taller, waiting. I could hear footsteps behind me, but couldn't turn around. The next day, the sign was back. So were the people. I broke then. I told my teacher everything. She called my mom. My mom finally drove out there with me after school, her jaw tight, her hand gripping the steering wheel. The turnout was empty. No sign, no pole. Just dirt and weeds. "There's nothing here," she said softly. "I know," I whispered. "That's worse." That evening, my grandfather came over. He listened quietly as I talked, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he nodded once and said he'd walk with me the next day. When we reached the spot, the sign was there. So were the people. My grandfather stopped, his hand tightening around mine. "Oh," he said, "they've started again." He told me then about the old road, about how decades ago, buses used to stop there to take people to work camps farther inland. Seasonal work, dangerous work. Some never came back. When the road shut down, people still waited. Some still do. They wait for someone to take their place, he said. Keeps them from being the last. He walked up to the pole and scratched his own name beneath mine. The people turned toward him. Really turned, for the first time. "Run," he told me. I ran until my lungs burned. When I looked back, the sign was gone. It never returned. Neither did my grandfather. But my name faded from the pole, and no one ever waited there again. I was in the middle of scanning a stack of reports when I noticed the ink looked darker than it should have. That sounds stupid written out, but when you work with old paper every day, you know what fading looks like. This was the opposite. The names on the page looked freshly written, like they'd been traced over some time after the fire happened. I leaned closer, reread the line, and felt a tight pinch of confusion turn into something colder. The report was from a house fire in 1998. Total loss. 2 occupants deceased. I had catalogued it myself years earlier. I remembered because one of the victims shared my last name, no relation, just coincidence. But now the name was gone. In its place was another one I recognized immediately. A man who lived 3 streets from me, alive. I'd waved to him that morning. I told myself I was tired. I pulled the physical file from the box and laid it next to the scanned version on the screen. Same change, same ink, same wrong name. My chest felt tight, like I'd missed a step. I checked the timestamp on the scan. It hadn't been altered. According to the system, the document had always looked like this. I pulled another report at random, then another. Each one had a victim name I knew. Not famous people, not firefighters. Regular residents. People who paid their bills at City Hall, who showed up at community events. People who were not dead. I didn't say anything at first. That was my mistake. I spent the rest of the day checking, flipping through binders, opening boxes I hadn't touched in years. The pattern was unmistakable. The older the report, the more recent the name. Like the records were updating themselves to stay current. That night, a garage fire broke out on the edge of town. 1 fatality. When the preliminary report came across my desk the next morning, the name was already in the archive. In a report from 2001. I sat there staring at it while the radio crackled with updates, my hands flat on the desk, my mouth dry. I went to the fire chief. I showed him the reports. He listened, arms crossed, his face hardening with each page. When I finished, he closed the folder and slid it back to me. "You need to stop digging," he said. This isn't your job. It is literally my job, I said. My voice shook. These records are changing. People are dying. He looked away. People always die. The next name I found was my neighbor's wife. 2 days later, her kitchen caught fire. Faulty wiring. No survivors. I threw up in the bathroom at work and didn't come out until my legs stopped trembling. I started warning people. Quietly. Carefully. I told my sister to check her smoke alarms twice. I told friends to get their wiring inspected. When I tried to tell the neighbor, whose name I'd seen next, he laughed and said I'd been breathing too much old paper. The reports kept updating. Faster now. Some changed overnight. Some while I watched, the letters darkening, reshaping themselves into new names like ink being pulled by a magnet. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started checking the archive every morning with a sense of dread that felt physical, like pressure on my ribs. One day, I found my own name. It was in a report dated 1984. A fire I'd never heard of. Single fatality. 'Cause undetermined. I panicked then. Real panic. I called in sick and drove aimlessly, trying to outrun something that was already written down. I disconnected appliances. I slept with a fire extinguisher by my bed. I didn't cook. I didn't shower hot. I didn't breathe right. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. On the 4th day, I went back to the archive. My name was gone. Replaced by someone else's. That's when I understood. The reports weren't predicting fires. They were assigning them. The record needed to stay full. Names were placeholders until the event caught up. I made my decision that afternoon. I pulled the oldest report we had. A mill fire from 1942. Dozens dead. The names were blurred, half illegible. I typed my own name into every line. Every victim. Page after page, I overwrote them all. Then I locked the file. That night, the mill burned again. Empty. Abandoned. No casualties. The next morning, my name was gone from every report. I quit 2 weeks later. I moved out of Sutherland. The fires didn't stop, but the reports stayed still. I still think about those names sometimes, about what it means to be written down. I keep my own records now, just in case. I was unlocking the book drop when I felt the weight shift inside the metal bin, heavier than it should have been for a Tuesday morning. I braced it with my hip and slid the panel open, expecting textbooks or overdue paperbacks, and instead saw a stack of hardcovers arranged neatly, spines aligned like someone had taken their time. That alone made my chest tighten. Returned books were usually dumped, not placed. As I lifted the first one, a folded sheet of lined paper slipped out and landed at my feet. I picked it up, annoyed, already thinking about calling whoever kept stuffing loose notes into library property. Then I read the first sentence and felt my hands go numb. It was written like a letter. Calm, precise. It described a hit and run that had never been reported. Down to the color of the truck, and the way the body had been dragged off the shoulder to make it look like an animal strike. It ended with an apology that didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. I stood there too long, rereading it until the words blurred. I told myself it was fiction, some kind of creative writing prank. But the details felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Too ordinary. Too careful. Inside, I checked the other books. Each one had a note. Different handwriting. Different crime. An assault behind a bar. A burglary that turned violent. a missing hiker who never came home. None of them were cases I recognized, which bothered me more than if they had been. I brought the papers to my supervisor. She skimmed one, frowned, and told me to throw them away. "We're not the police," she said, "and we don't need trouble." I did what she said. I dropped them in the trash behind the building, watched the lid fall shut, and tried to forget the way my stomach had twisted while I read them. 2 weeks later, the police blotter changed. I noticed because I typed it up for the bulletin board every month. A cold case from years earlier had been quietly updated. Hit and run. New details. Same details from the letter. I sat there staring at the typewriter, my fingers hovering uselessly over the keys. I went out back and dug through the trash. Of course it was gone. More notes appeared after that. Always in returned books, always crimes no one talked about. And slowly, one by one, the police files caught up. No announcements, no arrests, just silent corrections, as if the town was editing itself. I started keeping copies. I told myself it was for my own sanity, to prove I wasn't imagining the pattern. I hid them in a folder at home, reading them at night, memorizing the voices. They were different, but they shared a tone. Not guilt, not fear, relief. One confession described a woman I recognized, a church volunteer. The note talked about a baby left too long in a bathtub. An accident, it said, made worse by panic. I couldn't breathe while I read it. The next month, a decades-old infant death was reclassified. 'Cause amended. I stopped sleeping. I jumped every time the book drop clenched. I started checking handwriting against patron cards, comparing phrasing, watching people too closely. Everyone began to look heavier to me, like they were carrying something unseen. Then I found one addressed to me. It wasn't literal. It didn't use my name. But it described a thing I'd never told anyone. A lie I'd built my life around. A choice I'd made years before that had ruined someone else's future. My vision tunneled as I read it, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear. I waited for the police files to change. They didn't. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing updated. No quiet correction. No amended report. It sat there unresolved like a loose thread. That's when I understood. The notes weren't confessions. They were offerings. The town decided which ones it accepted. I tested it. I typed up a fake confession, something small but believable, and slipped it into a returned book myself. A theft. Minor injury. Nothing life-altering. I waited. The police blotter stayed the same. The next night, I burned the copy I'd kept of my own note. The next morning, the folder at home was gone. Empty space where it had been. The book drop was full when I arrived at work. Overflowing. More than I'd ever seen. I didn't open it. I locked the library and went to the sheriff's office instead, my hands shaking as I told him everything. He listened politely, then smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "Some things are better left returned," he said. I quit that day. I moved away a month later. Pilot Rock still has its library, still has its book drop. The police records are tidy now, complete. I don't borrow books anymore. And I don't write things down unless I'm ready for them to be true. I was checking the time cards when I noticed the extra punch. It was almost 3 in the morning. The quiet stretch when machines hummed steady and nothing was supposed to surprise me anymore. The card belonged to Tyler Reeves. I knew it, because I'd approved his hours myself earlier that week. He hadn't been scheduled tonight. Yet there it was. A clean clock, out time stamped at 2:47, neat as anything. I told myself it was a system glitch. We'd had software problems before, especially after the last upgrade. Still, my chest tightened as I pulled the security log and confirmed Tyler hadn't badged in. No entry, no exit. Just a clock out for a shift he never worked. I walked the floor to calm myself, checking stations, nodding to the guys on duty. Tyler wasn't there. He shouldn't have been. When I came back to the office, another card had updated. Then another. 3 names now, all clocking out within minutes of each other, all supposedly finishing shifts they hadn't started. I called payroll. No answer. I called my boss and left a message that sounded steadier than I felt. Then I pulled the camera footage. At first, everything looked normal. Conveyor belts, empty corridors, the glow of exit signs. Then, right at 2:47, I saw them. Tyler stepped into frame near the side door, walking shoulder to shoulder with someone else. The other figure wore the same uniform cut, but older. Faded logo. A style we'd stopped using years ago. They moved in sync. Tyler didn't look scared. He looked tired. When they reached the door, Tyler swiped out, even though the system showed no swipe. The door opened anyway. They left together. My hands were slick on the mouse. I rewound and watched it again, slower. The second figure's face never turned toward the camera. It was like it didn't need to. By the end of the week, 6 more time cards had done the same thing. Different nights, same pattern. Workers who weren't scheduled, clocking out quietly, leaving with someone dressed like the mill remembered itself being. I started asking questions. Careful ones. Tyler said he'd been home asleep that night. Swore it. He looked confused, then annoyed, then uneasy when I showed him the time card. He laughed it off too fast. The next morning, he didn't show up for his real shift. I dug into old records after that, pulling accident reports, injury logs, anything I could find. The uniforms on the footage matched old photos. Men who'd died on the job decades ago. Fires, crush injuries, falls. Their names were still etched on plaques near the break room. I realized the clock out times matched those deaths. Not the dates, the minutes. I didn't sleep. I stayed late every night, watching cameras, waiting. When it happened again, I was ready. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. I saw them in person that time. A line of workers walking toward the exit, each paired with someone older, quieter. No one spoke. The air felt thick, like the mill was holding its breath. When Tyler reached me, he finally looked scared. I already left, he whispered. I just forgot to go. I tried to stop him. My hand passed through the older man like smoke. Tyler pulled free gently, apologetic, and followed him out. The next day, Tyler's locker was empty. Payroll said he'd been paid out in full. Employment marked complete. I understood then. The mill wasn't stealing people. It was letting them finish. That night, my own card updated. I didn't fight it when the older man appeared beside me. Wearing my uniform from a time I hadn't lived yet, I felt an overwhelming relief. We walked out together. The mill is still running. People still work there. I don't. I clocked out on time, finally.